Hello, and welcome to the Biodiesel Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Anna Simet, and I hope you're all doing well. On this episode, I have with me Jobe, CEO of the Sustainable Advanced Biofuel Refiners. And if his name sounds quite familiar, that's because he served as CEO of the National Biodiesel Board for 17 years. And Joe is a leader, author, and international speaker on renewable energy. He's written many widely published articles, and he's also been on a lot of TV shows, from the Today Show to the History Channel to the Discovery Channel and CNN. So, Joe, welcome to the podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Anna.
Absolutely. I think let's start by having you tell us about SABR, its members and mission, and then what differentiates you guys from other organizations.
Yeah, so SABR is a biodiesel trade association. We're a more focused trade association. There are other groups out there that have a broader focus that represent sort of a broader group of advanced biofuels, but we are a group that have a more focused station and mission for the biodiesel stakeholders, and that includes everyone in the value chain, from the soybean farmers to the crushers and biodiesel producers, the input suppliers and glycerin refiners and distributors and retailers. And so we have about 7 state soybean groups on our board. We just seated a former leader from Illinois, Ron Kindred. We have some crushers. We have a number of biodiesel producers, and we have the 2 largest truck stop operators, including on our board, including Love's Truck Stops and Pilot/Flying J/Berkshire Hathaway. Between them, they represent a large chunk of the buyers of biodiesel. Between those two, they probably purchase half of the nation's biodiesel. So we incorporated as a 501c6 just 2 years ago with 20 member organizations. Now we have over 75 member organizations and growing. And we've been extremely busy and working to sort of elevate the voice of biodiesel stakeholders.
Yeah, and that's much needed right now. Thanks for that great introduction to SABR. And I know that there are so many things that we can talk about today, so I'm just going to start here. The trade war with China. It's had impacts on agricultural exports, particularly soybeans. President Trump announced a soybean deal last week with China. They've pledged to buy 12 million tons through January, followed by an annual 25 million tons beginning next year. So this will presumably bring some relief to U.S. farmers. But is this enough? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's still down from the 5-year average, and it will help. It is welcome. It is a welcome development for the farmers. It will help put a dent in the dramatic surpluses of whole beans, but it doesn't really change the crush situation. Kind of what's driving the crush situation is a number of policy uncertainties, and particularly policy uncertainties for biomass-based diesel. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those here in a bit. But what can be done long-term is a healthy and growing biodiesel market here in the United States. If we do indeed increase our domestic crush, and we'll have 80% meal, 80% or 20% oil. So if we have more meal, increase our crush and have more meal, and we can grow, our livestock production with the meal, we can grow our biofuel production with the oil, and we can, instead of exporting whole beans, if we are exporting more value-added products, such as energy and meat exports, as well as aquaculture and other things that can be done to as a value add. That's a more sustainable long-term future that we're trying to contribute to.
Okay. So on that note of trade, UCO, used cooking oils, essentially come to a halt. Its imports into the United States. How has that impacted the industry?
Yeah, it came to a halt because of a moratorium, at least a temporary moratorium that was
Mhm.
put on it because uh, there were some there was some real suspicious activity about this tsunami of Chinese UCO that was coming in primarily to New Orleans and Houston, primarily to feed, and also into California, primarily to feed a number of renewable diesel plants. And there was really not any significant tracking of it. And there was some evidence that, you know, some of it was what they call buco, barely used cooking oil, maybe fried one French fry in some palm oil and spiked it. So it's a good thing that moratorium has sort of halted that to see that, our domestic farmers were not being, drowned in this Chinese imported product. Going forward, longer term, we need to figure out how we're going to address that. But having the UCO halted has not significantly impacted the U.S. biodiesel industry. What has impacted the U.S. biodiesel industry and the dramatic downturn that we have experienced all of 2025 are these policy uncertainties that we continue to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great segue to our next question then. The RVOs, always delayed. It's left producers and investors uncertain about the industry. So tell us more about how these delays have impacted the industry. When should we expect the RVOs to be finally published, and how are they looking in terms of, our hopes and expectations? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, SABR sent a group of about a dozen of our members to meet with EPA this week, and we did meet with a number of the OAR team and the OTAC team. They were working even though the government is shut down. And our big message to them was a big thank you. There's a lot in their proposed rule that is really good, and that SABR supported it in the comments, and that we just really need to get this over the finish line. Some of the things that were good about the proposal were the numbers. 67% increase in 26 over volumes in 2025 for the biomass-based diesel category. We also support the discount on imported feedstocks and fuels, with the exception in our comments that we said that the RIN discount should be harmonized with 45Z, and 45Z as a producer's credit is a North American program. So we think that if they're going to sort of put a half RIN discount on imports, that Canada and Mexico should be exempt from that discounted RIN. So those are some of the things. Also, they readdressed in the set rule. They tried to address the inflated equivalence values for renewable diesel and SAF compared to biodiesel. That has been a big issue for SABR. And if I can just try to briefly outline what that issue is. So RINs are the value of RINs are based on the equivalence value that's assigned to it to make it an ethanol gallon equivalent. So when they set the 1.5 equivalence value for biodiesel, they took into account the non-renewable methanol that stays in the finished fuel. But when they set the equivalence value of SAF at 1.6 and renewable diesel at 1.7, they did not take into account the non-renewable hydrogen that stays in the finished fuel. And they acknowledged that in the set rule and asked for comments on ways to address that. SABR did the math. We showed our work that if we did it during the set rule, we redid the calculations when during this period when the EPA showed their math. And what it shows is that if the non-renewable hydrogen and renewable diesel and SAF were to be properly accounted for, then renewable diesel would be somewhere between 1.5 and 1.6, and SAF would be 1.4. So that is one of the primary reasons that those inflated equivalence values is one of the primary reasons that renewable diesel has been cannibalizing biodiesel volumes over the last couple of years, because although this all sounds very technical, it translates to real dollars. So for example, that 0.2 difference, when you apply it to a RIN, when RINs are $1, for example, that inflated difference gives renewable diesel a 20-cent per gallon windfall that they should not be getting. And when D4 RINs are approaching $2 per RIN, you apply that equivalence value, that 0.2 difference gives renewable diesel a 40-cent per gallon windfall. So right now at let's just say they're at $1.50. That's like 25 cents. So today, right now, if a gallon of renewable diesel and a gallon of biodiesel are generated today, that gallon of renewable diesel is getting 25 cents more of RIN generation than biodiesel. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we have been stressing. Other biofuel groups in the SET proposal, they opposed, lowering, correcting the inflated equivalence values, and that caused EPA to punt on it. But when we filed our petition for review, SABR filed our petition for review on the SET rule over the equivalence value. The thing that we got was a concession agreement that they would readdress it in the FY26 RVO, which they did. And so we have some comments for improvement on their proposal, but that is critical that we stop that flaw in the implementation of the RFS.
Very well explained. Thank you, Joe. Let's talk a little bit more about 45Z. You had mentioned it. Guidance has been much delayed. There have been changes to it under this administration. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the Treasury had over 2 years to finalize a rule on the new 45Z. And because the new 45Z is way more complicated than the traditional blender's tax credit, which was referred to as 40A, that's the dollar per gallon that we're all familiar with. 40A was a refundable and transferable excise tax credit, and you could blend it at B99.9. By the way, back in 2005, after we got that tax credit passed in 2004 and signed by President Bush, I spent a week in Houston with the IRS task force, advisory task force advising on the writing of the regulations. And it was a blender's tax credit. And so they wanted to know how much they had to blend in order to have a taxable event. And they wanted to make it a 20% blend of biodiesel, 80% diesel fuel. And I made the argument on behalf of my members at NBB, the biodiesel producers. I said, if you do that, you will push the enforcement activity all the way down to the retail level. So you'll have tens of thousands of regulated parties. However, if you make it easy for biodiesel producers to blend, you'll only have about 40 regulated parties, at least at that time. And so you should make it 1 gallon of biodiesel into 1,000 gallons of diesel fuel. And they liked that argument. And that's how we got B99.9. A little bit of history there.
Okay.
So 45Z is way more complicated. It's an income tax credit. They did make it transferable. So if you don't have an income tax liability, you can sell it to someone that does have an income tax liability, but you sell it at a discount. You have to have insurance. There are additional compliance measures. You have to meet union requirements, prevailing wage, and apprenticeship, for example. It's much more complicated, and there's essentially no guidance. They did in January put out a notice of intent to issue a proposed rule, but they haven't issued a proposed rule. There was some information in that bulletin, but because 45Z is so new and it's much more compliance constrictive, it's just been the lack of implementing regulations have really almost shut down the industry all year long. I mean, folks are running it at roughly, maybe half or less of their production capacity, and mostly, and they're shutting on and off, mostly just to keep their pipes warm and a few of their major customers happy, and most importantly, their labor force. If they lose their labor force, they're probably not going to get them back. And so that's a huge problem, that they didn't even have a proposed rule, let alone a final rule, out all year. And then with the one big beautiful bill, the budget reconciliation bill, that made changes to 45Z, and I'm sure we can talk about those changes, that really even started the clock over on getting 45Z, getting a proposed rule. So we've gone 2.5 years with not even a proposed rule since it was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. And then the changes, which were positive changes, it really starts the clock over for Treasury to issue a proposed rule, let alone a final rule. So that's problematic as well. And so 45Z has really had the industry, and the lack of implementing regulations has had the industry stuck in the ditch all year.
Yeah, very frustrating. So I just have a few more questions for you, Joe. I'm sure we could talk much longer. So let's go to the government shutdown. It has a direct impact on our regulatory agencies, EPA, USDA, both of which play critical roles for our industry. How do these shutdowns affect producers?
Yeah, so it affects it primarily in two ways. One is that the implementation of the final rule of the 26 and 27 RVOs, that was already late, and each day the government stays shut down, it's going to be even longer before they can issue a final rule. Same for 45Z. Treasury needs to get out a proposed rule and then a final rule, and the government shut down with, people being furloughed and so forth. It just delays it even further. So every day the government's shut down is, just that much longer before, we get a rule that can open up these markets. And another thing is that one thing that we're really proud of is that SABR is one of the only biofuel groups, if not the only biofuel group, that has been saying since January that we need some we predicted these delays. We predicted that the credits would not be able to move because 45Z, lack of implementing regulations, would be a barrier to that. And we asked Congress and we asked biofuel, other fellow biofuel and ag groups to work with us to try to get some transitional relief. And our transitional relief was let's get a 40A blender's tax credit extension extended one more time to buy some time to get some implementing regulations for 45Z. And we were not persuasive to our fellow biofuel allies and stakeholders. They said, no, we've got guidance with that IRS bulletin, and 45Z will be trading throughout the year. And that didn't happen. The one piece of transitional relief that we did get, thanks to Senator Grassley, is an extension of the small agri biodiesel tax credit. So there's been a 10-cent per gallon on the first 15 million gallons, a producer's tax credit for biodiesel only, not renewable diesel, and agricultural products, so virgin vegetable oils and animal fats. But it wasn't very useful because it was an income tax credit, and most biodiesel producers are LLCs that are not taxable entities and don't have a tax liability. And so that credit wasn't transferable. But in the budget bill, we did get some transition relief to turn that 10 cents into 20 cents and to make it transferable. So that was huge. That was a huge lift by Senator Grassley's office. Unfortunately, 45Z, it doesn't work by itself. It's a supplement to 45Z. And if 45Z is not working and the RINs are not doing their job, we really can't take advantage of that 20 cents very well. Mm-hmm. So government shutdown is hurting us on all three of those fronts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Joe, with all this uncertainty and policy timelines, how can biodiesel producers and trade organizations, help navigate volatility in the market? What strategies can the industry adopt? And where do you see potential opportunities for growth? I've been seeing a lot about the maritime industry lately. Kind of a loaded question.
Yeah. So we're still trying to persuade our fellow biodiesel stakeholders and ag stakeholders that we still need some transitional relief because, in our meeting with EPA this week, they said in terms of timeline of getting the final rule published, it's a good rule and would send us, when they finalize the rule, it will send a strong market signal to open up these markets. But not until then. And so they said, well, we've said publicly winter of 25, 26. Well, winter goes through March of 26. Right. And we have been suffering and bleeding out all year round. And we just cannot wait till March of 26. It's a similar story with 45Z. It would be surprising if we had a proposed rule before the end of the year, let alone a final rule. So it'll be sometime in 2026 before we get implementing regs on 45Z. And so SABR still believes that the easiest way to turn the markets back on is to just extend 40A, the blender's tax credit. There's muscle memory in that program. It's been around for 20 years. The markets know how to deal with it. It's liquid. It's the largest, most liquid tax credit in the United States tax code. It's refundable and transferable. And if we were to extend it even for a short-term period of 6 months or until such time as 45Z has implementing regulations in place, it would turn the light switch back on immediately. And that's what we need to save this industry from, severe long-term damage that will damage a whole range of industries, including, the farmers. We had one of our members who was a glycerin refiner, Environmental Operating Solutions, was attended the EPA meeting with us this week, and they reminded EPA that because of the downturn in biodiesel production, supplies of glycerin are have been dramatically decreased, and their primary product that they do is they collect crude glycerin from biodiesel plants. Biodiesel produces about a 10% byproduct of glycerin. They clean it up and they sell it. They sell it along with some specialty enzymes to municipalities for their water treatment plants. And the glycerin supply has been so scarce that it's been difficult for them to supply their municipalities, and could impact water treatment going into recipient surface water like the Chesapeake Bay or a number of places like this, and could actually cause some municipalities to violate their EPA permitting. So there's so many elements throughout the value chain and so many industries that are taking an economic hit and other hits because of these delays. We need to open up the markets, and the best way to do that would be a short-term extension as a bridge of 40A, get the markets going so we can get these two foundational programs, the RFS and 45Z, in place.
Mm-hmm. The ripple effects that you don't think about. Well, Joe, I just want to say that this conversation has been very interesting and enlightening. And thank you so much for all you're doing for the biodiesel industry. I hope that we talk in 6 months and you have, some good news to share. So again, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and sharing your insights on state of the biodiesel industry.
Yes, I'm delighted to, and I'm glad to talk anytime.
Wonderful. Well, I'll definitely take you up on that. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day and be well.